Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. Well, I think we have an official ceasefire out of the war in the Middle East. In the past 13 days, Iran hurled more than 1,000 drones and over 500 ballistic missiles at Israel and still lost the fight. Today, we're going to run the numbers. I want to give you a scorecard of what Tehran spent and what they lost, what Israel endured, and why the region is holding its breath because in reality, this thing's far from over. So before we do that, a quick word from our sponsor. Hey, folks, if you're like me and you look in the mirror once in a while and think, Dad, is that you? One of the things that is really making me feel old is when I watch my hair start thinning out. And I know lots of people feel that way. I know it isn't just old age either. It can be stress, hormones, diet. A lot of that stuff can wreak havoc on your hair. And that's why I'm happy to tell you about something called Roots, which is a new product from my friends at the Wellness Company. You've seen me talking about their emergency kits like this one. A lot of people have been buying these. They're great. But this new product is really intriguing. It uses 7 different peptides to support your body's natural repair process and help you grow visibly thicker, fuller hair. It also includes methylene blue, which, aside from sounding cool, actually supports mitochondrial function and fights oxidative stress right at the follicle. Daily use can help extend the growth phase and cut down on shedding, whether it's stress or aging or just the brutal honesty of HT video. Roots goes after the root cause, literally. So check it out at twc.health/hotzone. Use code HOTZONE for 10% off plus free shipping. Again, that's twc.health/hotzone, code HOTZONE. 10% off, free shipping, worth a shot. All right, let's get back to our video. Okay, folks, I got 1,000 things to do today, and so I'm going to knock this out as fast as I can and maybe not keep you waiting around for an hour while we talk about it. And we'll just do a shorter version of this for today. Now, first of all, the Iran conflict scorecard. All right, about 550 ballistic missiles were fired at Israel and 1,000 UAVs as well. The casualties in Israel were 28 civilians killed when it was all said and done. Now, they're not counting the one lady who had a heart attack, I believe, which would have brought it to 29. Anyway, of the 28, they say 27 were civilians and one was an IDF soldier. That IDF soldier was at home with his family in Beersheba. He was an 18-year-old trainee named Corporal Eitan Zaks. He was in the bomb shelter with his mother, his girlfriend, and a neighbor, and the bomb shelter took a direct hit. That was the last strike on Israel that actually caused damage. Inside Israel, at least 9,000 people have been displaced from their homes. Hundreds of homes have been destroyed or crippled. They also hit the Bazan oil refinery down near Haifa and hit a transmission pipe there that's going to have to be fixed. So they had to partially halt operations for a time. Didn't destroy the facility, but they're going to have to fix a few things. They did destroy the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, which is worth $300 to $500 million. It's very expensive labs where they were studying heart disease and how to fix it. And so Iran, true to its barbaric nature, just basically set back heart disease research in Israel by several years. They really say that they've lost almost everything and they're going to have to start over. So very unfortunate there. But if you, in the greater scheme of things, they've lost a few thousand homes that are going to have to be rebuilt or repaired. They've lost the Weizmann Institute and that oil refinery. Again, that oil refinery is just kind of lightly damaged. It's not real bad. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as it could have been because the Iron Dome interceptors took out, they say 83% of all the missiles that came in and 99.99% of the drones. As in fact, only one drone out of 1,000 drones, more than 1,000, made it through and damaged a home and didn't cause any injuries. So Iran's drone strategy is an abject failure. Abject failure. It did nothing but cost Iran money. Now, of the missiles, which obviously are much more expensive than the drones, only 50 or 60 of those missiles actually breached the Iron Dome, and only 8 of them caused lethal casualties. So out of 550 missiles, only 8 missiles actually killed anybody. And that's astounding. It's very good. Now, of course, the United States assisted with air defense crews, ISR assets, and supported both interceptions and follow up strikes on Iran's nuclear network. And so that's actually a win for Israel. Getting the United States to participate in this just shows how important this war was in the greater geopolitical scheme of things. Now, let's do a check on costs. The Iranians short-range ballistic missiles, 100 to 150,000 each. Shahed 136 loitering munitions are between 20 and 50,000 a piece. That's probably what Iran pays for them, and other people pay as high as almost $200,000 for those things. But if you do some rough math, you're talking about between 80 and $275 million expended, depending on the makeup of the missiles. Okay. And that doesn't include the launchers, which about 65% of those were destroyed, which means that Israel did such a great job of setting back Iran's capabilities. Iran started with over 3,000 missiles that could reach Israel. Now they're down to about 1,000, and they are down to less than 200 launchers. That is astounding. It's massive. They've also destroyed every launcher that was in the western part of the country of Iran. So they're going to have to fire them from further east. If they fire any more, that reduces the number of things they can hit inside Israel and reduces the accuracy somewhat on those missiles. So when it comes to property damage in Israel, the preliminary estimates say that it was about $1.5 billion worth of damage that was done. That's double what was done on October 7th. But then if you add in the Weizmann Institute, the full cost is probably approaching $2 billion. And that doesn't include the missiles that they expended shooting down Iran's missiles, which was several $100 million as well. All in all, that's a fairly, I mean, it's expensive for sure, but it is very little for what they accomplished. And as I kept saying, Iran was striking all the wrong things. They didn't strike anything that militarily hampered Israel at all. The strikes on civilian targets were meant to sow terror, but they actually galvanized the Israeli will to see this thing through. As it turned out, they're not actually going to see it through, at least not yet. And we'll talk a little more about what's gone on in the last 24 hours in just a second. But suffice it to say, President Trump managed to very harshly impose a ceasefire on Israel.
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
And stop them from continuing their objectives, pursuing their objectives of regime change in Iran. But Israel's finding some ways around that as well. Now, what I mean by that is air defense activity was picked up in Shiraz, Tehran, and Tabriz last night. And that activity apparently is because there were quadcopter drones that were going around striking things in those areas from inside Iran, meaning they did not originate from outside the country. Now, this is likely more Mossad shenanigans because there are still a lot of Mossad agents running around inside Iran. They still have apparently some leftover munitions, loitering munitions or suicide drones from the initial attack, and they were making use of those last night. Israel, of course, denies that or didn't say anything about it. They don't make a habit of commenting on operations like that. But it is likely that Israel is still engaged, at least in Iran, by their Mossad agents that are inside the country. You can bet that they are setting up using the chaos in Iran as they lick their wounds from all of the 12 days of getting pounded. They're taking advantage of that chaos to emplace a lot of listening devices, cameras, electronic surveillance, and even weaponry around the country. And so that will be used in any future follow on attacks, because Israel has said that if Iran tries to restart its nuclear program, Israel will strike again. And I think you can take that to the bank. I don't think we've seen the end of targeted assassinations. If they get the opportunity to take out other high ranking leaders inside Iran, there's a likelihood that they will do so. They are committed to setting back the nuclear capabilities of Iran as far as possible. Now, it was a win for Israel that the proxies that were supposed to come to Israel to Iran's defense stayed mostly quiet. Hezbollah fired 0 rockets in this, or drones, as far as we know, in this last 2 weeks. The Houthis launched a grand total of 2 missiles over 12 days. That's actually a lot less than they were firing before Israel went hard against Iran. And so that is pretty massive. Now, the costs for Iran are staggering. There were well over 1,200 sorties flown by Israeli aircraft, and each one of those sorties, each one of those aircraft can drop multiple bombs. And so every single one of those bombs struck their targets. So they destroyed literally hundreds of billions of dollars of Iranian infrastructure, nuclear programs, military infrastructure, and government buildings in the last 2 weeks. Hundreds of billions of dollars. There is no comparison to the damage that took place in Israel and the damage that took place in Iran. None whatsoever. Now, there's a real row going on right now between President Trump and his administration and CNN, which is reporting that initial intelligence estimates out of Fordo say that the site was not damaged all that badly and really only set back the Iranian nuclear program by a matter of weeks instead of months or years. President Trump came out very strongly against that, was very upset at that report, and really lambasted CNN for putting it out there. The bottom line is what President Trump is saying is that the Iranians have had their entire nuclear program destroyed. Now, I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. What President Trump said is that the Israelis still have these agents inside Iran, and some of them have made their way to the Fordo complex and are reporting that it is completely out of commission. But as we've said before, and you remember me saying this months and months ago, Fordo is so deep underground, and the way it was built, very compartmentalized, specifically to withstand deep penetration bunker buster strikes, so that if they blew up one portion of it, other portions would still survive. Some parts of Fordo are literally a half mile underground or more, far beyond the reach of even our most powerful bunker buster bombs. And so the best we could do would be to destroy the entrances as far back as possible and really try to collapse all of those entrances and thereby destroy any sensitive equipment that's inside that requires electricity to run, those centrifuges, for example, things like that. And basically, instead of collapsing the entire structure, which would be almost impossible to do from outside, to collapse enough of the structure of Fordo to make it not worth going back in and trying to dig it out and restart. And I think in that, the United States was fairly successful. But the final tally has yet to be seen. I mean, honestly, neither the Trump administration nor CNN and their intelligence estimates or whatever have had the opportunity to really take a very close look at the damage. And so we will find out in the coming days, weeks, and months exactly how bad that was, hopefully. But suffice it to say, the Iranians are not going to be enriching any uranium there anytime soon. Now, the Iranian government came out with a statement today and said that they have actually been secretly building another uranium enrichment facility in a secret location underground, and it's almost ready to go into operation, and they should be back enriching uranium in the very near future, in the next few days even. Now, I'm not sure how much we can believe anything the Iranian government says. What I do believe is that if there was something like that, the Israelis would know about it and they would likely have bombed it, because the Israelis had such good intelligence from deep inside the IRGC and the Iranian government and military that they couldn't keep something like that a secret. I think that if you look at the scope of Israeli intelligence collecting inside Iran, it is mind-boggling. They were inside the government and had access. I mean, some of the highest ranking officials in the IRGC, for example, turned out to be Israeli spies. Now, on that note, Iran has been going around and rounding up people and executing them in a big way in the last few days. And that will continue. You can bet that the Iranian government is extremely shook because of the damage that they just sustained. They lost about 1,000 ballistic missiles that were destroyed on the ground. So the 550 ballistic missiles that were shot at Israel should have been a couple thousand missiles shot at Israel, but the missiles were destroyed on the ground before they could launch. Iran lost 15 senior nuclear scientists killed, and probably a whole lot more that are calling in sick. The IRGC Air and Space Commander and 3 other flag officers were eliminated. Dozens of Tehran command nodes were hit. And all of that with literally 0 Israeli jets lost, no Israeli pilots lost, no active participants in this conflict on the Israeli side, even wounded. So there were no SAR missions that were required to go in and rescue pilots that were downed. Iran managed to down 2 Israeli surveillance drones. That's the total extent of what they were able to accomplish in terms of defending themselves, and that's virtually nothing. Now, the IAEA has people inside Iran still. They haven't been able to go to many of these sites yet, but they will in the next few days. And they so far claim there has not been any leak of radioactive material. And that actually is a little concerning, because if that is true, then it is likely that the 400 kilograms, or over 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium, has been spirited away and could even be outside of Iran at this point in some place like China. Now, it was funny that the word came out today that when Vladimir Putin called President Trump and offered his assistance with negotiating a settlement or a ceasefire with Iran, President Trump told him, "I don't need help with Iran. I need help with you," meaning, I need help getting you to stop bombing Ukraine so that we can have a peace deal in Ukraine. And it bears mentioning that while the Shahed 136 drones that Iran fired at Israel, over 1,000 of them over the past 12 days, were all shot down. I mean, essentially, like, only one got through. The Russians have fired now more than 28,700 Shahed style drones at Ukraine over the past 3 years. And many of those have gotten through because Ukraine just doesn't have the air defense network and setup that Israel has. And so they have caused a lot of damage inside Ukraine. 28,000 of those drones. And that it says nothing about the ballistic missiles and, of course, the on the ground invasion of Ukraine. So the fact that Ukraine is still standing is a real testament to the Ukrainian people. They have suffered and suffered greatly. And it's good to see that President Trump is pushing back on Vladimir Putin a little bit in that. Now, there are on this war is not over in any way. This war is not over in the Middle East. There are still big firefights happening inside Gaza. Israel is still striking targets inside Lebanon on a daily basis. They're still working together with Syria, the new Syrian government. We'll talk more about that in just a second. And there are hostage negotiations that are taking place, mediated by Egypt and Qatar. There's a draft deal that was just floated that where Hamas would release 8 living hostages and half the dead ones on day one of a new ceasefire. And then they would release 2 more living hostages after 45 days. And this is just that would be more torture for the Israelis. There's not a high likelihood that this ceasefire will go through because Israel understands just how absolutely excruciating it was to get their hostages released in drips and drabs a couple at a time and get paraded before cameras and all of that garbage. Israel doesn't want to go through that again. And so they're going to want to push for all of their living hostages to be returned in one chunk. Now, so I wouldn't expect to see a ceasefire out of Gaza anytime soon. Also, especially because Israel just lost 7 soldiers in a really tragic incident where they hit an IED with their vehicle, and all 7 IDF soldiers burned to death on the inside of the vehicle before they could get them out. That just happened today. A very sad day for Israel to have that many soldiers lost, especially all at once. The political reaction from the ceasefire between Iran and Israel runs the gamut. The U.S. is has really thrown Israel under the bus in some ways. President Trump spoke to Israel's impotence. Israel was impotent to defeat Iran without the United States' help, and so the United States had to come in and assist. That wasn't a very nice thing to say to our ally. I don't know that they were impotent. They said that they had a plan to take out Fordo if the United States didn't want to help, and I believe they would have done it. And they didn't end up needing to, but it doesn't mean that they were impotent to do so. Now, on the other hand, President Trump signaled that he would be willing to continue to use military force on Iran if they choose to continue enriching uranium and not give up their nuclear program. So that's good from President Trump. Good to see that. President Trump also sent a message to Iran via Qatar, and the quote was, "No more nonsense, no shooting," meaning you've got a ceasefire, you better honor it. And so he's pushing very hard to keep that ceasefire at least long enough for him to get to this NATO summit and claim that he stopped the war. Netanyahu came out and said that fresh strikes would happen in Iran if they restart enrichment. And Tehran says, well, we're going to restart enrichment. So we very well may see more strikes on Iran in the future. There have been daily, quiet, direct negotiations between Jerusalem and Damascus. Now, this is interesting because on Sunday, there was a suicide bomb that went off in a Greek Orthodox church in Damascus and killed 22 Christians and wounded a bunch more. My people on the ground in Syria are telling me that was not ISIS, that was not Al Qaeda that did that. That was agents of the GSS, that is the actual new sitting government inside Syria under al-Sharaa. If that's the case, that would bear out the messaging that I'm getting from inside Syria which says that al-Sarraj's new government is saying one thing to the West and acting like they want to be a civilized country, but they're instituting Sharia law and cracking down and oppressing people like the Alawites, the Christians, the Kurds, etc., inside Syria. So Syria is still a mess, and it's going to stay a mess for some time, it sounds like. Now, a couple of miscellaneous things. New York, I just wanted to comment on this. New York, they're having their primaries for a new mayoral elections, right? For a new mayor in New York City. And the guy that just won the Democratic mayoral primary is an absolute communist, anti Israel extremist named Zohran Mamdani. Unbelievable. Now, if that guy, and he's actually favored to win the mayoral race inside New York. And you know what that shows you? It shows you what I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and that is that there are two countries that live in America, not one. One of those countries is, I mean, both of those countries are not compatible with one another. If you think that you could, I mean, think about it. Would you want your city being run by a outright communist who's talking about literally government taking over grocery stores and setting prices and all of the socialist, communist, leftist garbage that leads to places like Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela? It leads to people in Venezuela eating their pets and massive inflation and things like that. I mean, it's just so ridiculous that there are still so many people out there in America who have not learned the lessons of Venezuela, Cuba, China, and the USSR. It is absolutely astounding to me. Now, back to Israel to wrap this up. Despite the damage that took place in Israel, which was widespread. I mean, they hit everywhere from the south in Beersheba all the way up to Haifa in the north, and a bunch of strikes in Tel Aviv and things like that. They did not lose electricity. They didn't lose their water grid. They didn't lose their power grid. There were blackouts in Tehran. There were blackouts in Qom and Tabriz and places all across Iran. It is without a doubt 100%. If you have to declare a winner, but nobody really wins in war, but if you have to say, like, who lost the least, Israel is the winner in this conflict. They're not going anywhere. They weren't damaged all that badly. They are reopening flights to commercial flights now to Ben Gurion Airport. So I may actually be able to fly into Tel Aviv rather than having to try to take a boat across from Cyprus or go across the land border from Amman, Jordan. And so I will still be going to Israel in the next week or so. I'll be on my way to Israel and I'll be reporting there for about a month. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Make sure you go over to chuckholton.com and subscribe over there so you can get a lot of extra content. We're going to be doing a live phone call where you can do a video Zoom call with me coming up in just a couple days. And that's all been announced over at chuckholton.com. So you're going to want to be a subscriber or a supporter, I mean, over there in order to ask me your questions directly and tell me what you think. I really enjoy those phone calls where I can actually see what you guys look like and hear what you sound like and hear your stories and opinions and things like that. So you're definitely going to want to be involved there. Make sure that you also subscribe to this podcast here on YouTube and hit that like button for me. It's free and easy, and it helps a lot to make YouTube know that more people need to see this content. So again, make sure you go visit our sponsor, twc.health/hotzone, and put in code HOTZONE, get 10% off plus free shipping on all your awesome products like this one. This one's really cool here, and I'll do a unboxing on this at some point and put it up as a short. So that's all I got for today. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you. We'll see you again next time. Take care.